This video introduces the contents of the paper titled Superposition Mechanism as a Neural Basis for Understanding Others, which was published in Scientific Reports in 2022. The video was created by Hiroyuki Iizuka, one of the authors and a member of the Chain Center at Hokkaido University, Japan. Philosophers and scientists have long been engaged in understanding how people can predict and explain the minds and behaviors of others. Here, I will introduce three representative approaches to this issue. Theory uses implicit general knowledge called folk psychology. Folk psychology postulates that people have various theoretical entities, e.g. beliefs and desires, and, using those entities, they build up the explanations and prediction of others. In the simulation theory, people figure out how other people will think and act, by using their own cognitive mechanism to simulate their mental states. First, people build up the simulation model from their own sensory-motor interactions. Use their own resource to comprehend others' intentions. A critical position against these two ideas is the interaction theory. In this theory, ongoing interaction causes direct perception of others. These are the typical examples, and there would be so many variants or different ideas. Those theories can be illustrated like this. The standard views, theory and simulation theory, assume that the self pre-exists and acquires representations of others step by step using theories of mind or simulations. On the other words, pre-existing frame, a self, is filled with contents from the beginning, and the self uses its own resources to fill the content of another empty frame, the other. Interaction theorists oppose this view and claim that there are mutual relationships between the self and others right from the outset, and that these frames, self and other, are simultaneously filled with contents through interaction in the development process. However, the question that arises here is, how is the underlying framework of self and others actually constructed? Then we assume that there are no pre-existing frames of self and other, and that these concepts themselves are acquired through learning. From the viewpoint of an agent, the concepts of self and other are acquired through learning. It means it starts from a situation where there is neither self nor other. If there is no distinction between self and other, the external sensations are nothing more than external stimuli, even if they are considered sensations belonging to a particular body from the third-person perspective. Using these anonymous sensations, we must obtain the representations of self and other as a result of learning. What mechanism makes it possible to learn and obtain the representations of self and other, starting from the situation in which there is no clear distinction between them? When considering a framework where there is no distinction between self and others, the traditional construction of models distinguishing between self and others is not applicable. By processing without differentiating between self and others, a single model that includes self as well as others can be formed, which is termed as the any-one model here. This approach moves away from the conventional construction of models that separate self and others. In this any-one model, the given sensation is processed through multiple pathways to allow for multiple interpretations, such as one's own and that of others, with the results processed in the any-one model. For reference, Gordon, who initially proposed the simulation theory, has recently proposed a concept similar to our idea called agent-neutral coding. This is the concept model I described earlier, and I will now explain the neural network model that implements this concept model using deep neural networks. Initially, this model receives both visual and somatosensory inputs from the external environment as stimuli. These sensory inputs are then processed through multiple processing streams, following the concept model. The model involves two key processes, named Process 1 and Process 2. Starting with Process 1, the visual information is transformed by encoder 1, which operates as a feed-forward neural network. The features extracted by this encoder are then fed into an LSTM, serving as a superposition module. Similarly, somatosensory information is processed and input into the superposition module. Using these inputs, the superposition module computes its output. Moving on to Process 2, it similarly processes features and inputs them into the superposition module. It is important to note that encoder 1 and encoder 2 are distinct networks. In this setup, since the somatosensory inputs originate solely from oneself, process 1 uses one's own somatosensory inputs, while process 2, lacking such inputs, receives a constant value. The superposition module, following the same principle, calculates its output. Consequently, two outputs are generated from the two processing streams, which are then concatenated and fed into the final prediction module. This module is tasked with creating predictions of future vision. The network model might seem complex at first glance, but for a more detailed explanation, please refer to the paper. To summarize the situation, our proposed superposition module is installed in a particular agent. There is another agent nearby, and this other agent appears within the field of vision of the self-agent. The network equipped with this superposition module receives visual and somatosensory inputs and learns to predict future visual fields. The network does nothing but learn to predict visually. This is the simulation environment. There are two agents in the environment. One is Agent 1 equipped with a superposition module. It moves around the environment, acquiring visual and somatosensory inputs. This agent is trained to predict the future vision from the sequences of sensory inputs. The other agent represents another entity and does not move. Although it does not move, a set number of steps are defined as one episode, and the location changes with each episode. Additionally, landmarks that do not move are placed throughout the simulation. First, we demonstrate how well the network model can predict future visuals from the sensory inputs. This is the actual visual input of the agent. At this time, we block the agent's visual information to see how well it can predict. And this is the prediction result. You can find that the predictions are well made. Here is another example of the prediction result. Next, we try to visualize the internal states of the artificial neural network to find out what is obtained in the network. First, dimension of internal states at each time step are compressed by PCA. The internal states at each time step are plotted as the points on the PCA space. The points are colored in response to the physical location of the agent. For example, when the agent 1 is close to the green landmark, the internal states is plotted with green color. This is the result of H1, which are the internal states stored in the process 1. Similarly, we will plot the internal states of H2. However, this time, we will color them based on the physical location of agent 2. Those plots are collected over lots of different episodes. And here is the result, with all the points overlaid onto a single image. The left graph indicates that the internal state H1 is maintained according to physical locations and functions similarly to place cells known in neuroscience. Furthermore, it is understood that it memorizes this information internally in a two-dimensional plane to align with the physical space. On the other hand, the graph on the right shows that the internal state H2 of Agent 1's network is maintained according to the physical positions of Agent 2, the other. These internal states can be considered as the recently discovered social place cells. Considering that H1 has its own place cells and H2 has place cells for others, it can be assumed that Process 1 processes information related to Agent 1, and Process 2 embeds information about Agent 2. What kind of information might be contained in the visual features F1 and F2, extracted from one's own vision? Since F1 is believed to contain information about one's own Agent 1, a decoder is trained to reconstruct one's own visual input V1 from the visual feature F1. This becomes a learning process similar to autoencoder. After this learning, let's use the decoder to visualize what kind of information is contained in F2. This visualization is possible due to the superposition mechanism we propose. Since the superposition module processes both process 1 and process 2 in the same way without distinguishing between them, F1 and F2 have shared data formats. So, what kind of information do these visual features contain? The top video shows the self-vision, VT, given to agent 1 as external stimuli. The bottom one shows the result of auto-encoding learning using one's own vision. It can be observed that the learning has been appropriately conducted. This is the decoding result in process 2. This is the vision seen from the perspective of agent 2, which agent 1 can never access. Surprisingly, the information decoded from process 2 turns out to be the visual information of agent 2. Here are the another episode example. In this video, we briefly explained the results obtained through the superposition mechanism. In summary, the superposition mechanism processes both oneself and others without distinction. As a result, when one's own place cells emerge, the social place cells also naturally emerge, and a distinction between self and others arises internally. This allows one to acquire perspectives of others that would otherwise be unattainable. Similarly, activities like those of mirror neurons can also be explained. All these abilities are acquired simply through visual prediction learning using superposition. The advantage of predictive learning is self-supervised learning, as referred to in machine learning, which does not require an external teacher. Therefore, babies and young children can acquire these abilities without anyone's help. Merely by engaging in predictive learning of the sensory inputs that are continuously provided around the clock, it is possible to acquire these abilities. Finally, let me introduce some links to the social cognitive neurosciences briefly. Recent studies have provided evidence that these shared activations for self-experiences and empathic experiences for others are actually shared representations between them rather than just correlated activations. In the superposition network, visual encoders perform functions equivalent to visual perspective taking, as well as the distinction between self and other from a single visual sensation. This is consistent with the consideration that visual perspective taking is necessary for self-other distinction. While it is similar to the idea of neural reuse, in terms of repurposing parts of the brain circuitry, the superposition mechanism discussed here, unlike the initial theory or simulation theory, does not merely repurpose existing functions, that is, self, for others. Instead, it processes self and others without distinction, not prioritizing which came first. Thank you very much for watching. This research was conducted as an interdisciplinary study at the Center for Human Nature, AI, and Neuroscience, Hokkaido University, serving as a fusion of arts and sciences. The details of this study are described in this paper published in Scientific Reports. For more information, please visit this website.